Do you need a pelvic floor toner? Do you know what I'm talking about by a pelvic floor toner? Essentially, it's a device that you insert into your vagina to support pelvic muscle activity, either stimulating activity or being able to control contractions and releases of your pelvic floor muscles that work like a hammock or sling in the base of your pelvis. Why might you even consider a pelvic floor toner? Now, there are plenty of adverts out there for various different types of pelvic floor toners that could be from weighted eggs to vaginal combs or even electrical stimulation devices. You can even get pelvic floor toners that connect via Bluetooth with your smartphone to work you through a series of exercises. Who might consider these type of devices? Well, any woman that has concern about her pelvic floor, and that may be because she's encountered some urinary leakage, maybe even fecal leakage. Maybe there's a feeling of heaviness or dragging through the pelvis. Maybe just the stage of womanhood that you're going through, you notice some changes in how your pelvis feels and think, oh, do you know what? I'm going to take action here before something happens. And particular times in a woman's life where this may seem more relevant are after having a baby or when you're going through menopause. And for some of us older mums, those two periods can overlap as well. So you can be going through perimenopause not long after giving birth if you're actually what's classed as an older mum. And it's always great to hear that you're classed as being an older mum. So, do you need a pelvic floor toner of any description to be able to tone your pelvic floor? Well, this is where my first word of caution comes in, because suggesting that you need a pelvic floor toner to deal with any pelvic floor concerns relies on this presumption that all pelvic floor issues are due to weakness, and we know that is not the case. So whenever I'm asked, and I do get asked this quite a lot, but whenever I'm asked whether a woman should invest in a pelvic floor toner, because some of them are really quite expensive, my first recommendation is to visit a female health physiotherapist. And the reason for this is that a female health physiotherapist can actually do a full assessment of what's going on in your pelvic floor, and they are best placed to identify whether you actually need to do a strengthening and squeezing, tightening program, or whether you need to focus more on releasing, relaxing, and letting go. What's more, they'll be able to give you more information about any sensations that you're experiencing through your pelvis. So if there are any heaviness or dragging sensations, if you are encountering leakage as well. And maybe you've been diagnosed with a prolapse, and so you're thinking, well, I'll strengthen my pelvic floor to help with a prolapse. Whether that's a prolapse of the bladder, the rectal canal, maybe it's the cervix or the womb. There are other types of prolapse as well. So when it comes to prolapse, my first recommendation is to ask whoever's told you that you've got a prolapse what type of prolapse they think that you've got. And then again, ask for referral to a female health physio who can confirm the diagnosis of prolapse or maybe offer an alternative view and also give you more information on the stage of prolapse that you're experiencing. And from that, they will be able to help identify a bespoke plan for supporting your pelvic floor. So, it's not all about weakness, and we need to understand to what degree we need to strengthen and to what degree we need to relax. And even when we are focusing on the strengthening aspect, there are two different types of fiber within your pelvic floor. I refer to them as a Usain Bolt versus Mo Farah. There are quick fire fibers within that pelvic floor that act quickly in times of emergencies. May be a bit of a strong term, but when you really need them. So that cough, that laugh, that sneeze. Whereas there are other fibers within your pelvic floor that are more about endurance, supporting you and the organs and everything else above in your torso throughout the day. Which is also why your pelvic floor contractions or strengthening work won't feel as strong at the end of the day as they did at the beginning of the day, because over the day they're working. It's also why your pelvic floor engagement won't feel as strong if you haven't slept well, because if you're tired, so is your pelvic floor. And all of this is what can be taken into account by a female health physio, and also with holistic core restore coaches, where we're working with you in conjunction with a female health physio to support your pelvic floor. So first up then is seek the advice of a female health physio to understand what is actually going on with your pelvic floor. The second thing is to understand how to do your pelvic floor muscle activities, exercises, engagements properly. So a number of years ago now, but used to be, can you stop the flow of wee? And that was a way to judge whether your pelvic floor muscles were tightening and you could control that movement. Now, we don't want you to do your pelvic floor engagement activities whilst doing a wee, for one simple reason. Stopping and starting the flow of wee is going to disrupt the flow of urine from the bladder. That can cause issues such as interrupting the reflex of the bladder to release the urine, but also may lead to incomplete emptying of the bladder, which can give rise to urinary tract infections and other discomfort. So whilst it can occasionally be useful to just try and stop the flow of urine to see if you've got that control, actually it's not the best place to do it. And certainly please don't do your pelvic floor exercises whilst going for a wee. So again, understanding how to do those pelvic floor exercises is about finding the cue that works best for you. Do you get the strongest feeling of engagement when you're tightening around your back passage, when you're tightening around the vagina, if you're thinking about pulling your tailbone towards the front of the pelvis, if you're thinking about pulling your sit bones in the center of each buttock in the center together, or maybe it's a combination of all of those. I use a huge range of different visualizations when I'm working with women on my courses, so that they find the one that makes the most sense to their brain, so they can visualize it in their head as they're actually doing it, to help them to feel that stronger engagement. But again, importantly, with doing any pelvic floor exercises, it's important to not only be able to feel the tighten and lift, but also to feel the release and relax. And that ties in actually to my favorite pelvic floor visualization, which is why my logo is cherries. And it is imagining, and let's just make sure it is just imagining, that you are taking hold of a cherry with the vagina, drawing it gently up inside, and then as you breathe in, lower it down and let it go. So when working with clients, I combine that visualization for the pelvic floor and coordinating that movement with the breath, so that the top and the bottom of your core cylinder are supporting each other. But even then, I've mentioned already there are two different types of fibre within the pelvic floor. So which type of pelvic floor exercises are going to be most effective for you? Is it going to be those quick squeezes to help the fast twitch or the Usain Bolts in your pelvic floor? Or is it the long hold and continue to hold, maintaining that contraction over time while still breathing, and then releasing again under control? Maybe it's an element of both of those that you need to focus on, but it's understanding how to do that exercise properly and understanding which element of it is most relevant for you. Now, the other part of properly is internal control. So a number of things I see when I first start working with ladies, they're bobbing up and down on their chair because they're squeezing their buttocks rather than getting that internal contraction of the pelvic floor. There's always quite a strong link between the pelvic floor and the eyebrows, though I haven't scientifically proven that yet. It's an interesting observation. But something else that I see happen is a tilt of the pelvis, rocking backwards, tucking the tailbone under as a way of stimulating the movement, or they feel that's how they create the movement. So again, it's about supporting women to be able to feel that gentle tightening and lifting inside whilst lowering down. Now, I mentioned gentle tightening because again, there's this perception that we have to squeeze the life out of our pelvic floor when we're working it. Now, again, for some women, that maximal contraction is important within their overall pelvic floor training, but not for every woman. And certainly when we're looking at the endurance element of the muscles, we don't want to be squeezing the life out of it for as long as possible and holding on to that for an extended period of time. So it's recognizing that just the same as any other form of exercise, there are different ways to approach the exercises, and there are different levels of intensity that you may want to work at as well, which is again why it's a good recommendation to see a female health physio in the first instance to understand what is going to be the best approach for you. Now, beyond those things, I've already mentioned the term release, and I can't stress how important this is. So on my personal pelvic floor journey, release is the magic word. So I am someone who tends to hold on to abdominal muscles and a little bit to my actual pelvic floor muscles as well, so that they can fatigue over time. So I have conscious triggers to allow me to let that go, or to remind myself to let that go. Now, even if that isn't the primary focus of your pelvic floor training needs, it's still important for you to be able to fully release the pelvic floor. And this is for a couple of reasons. Again, it can be tricky to understand the difference between just relaxing the pelvic floor versus pushing down into the pelvic floor. But hopefully, just in me saying that out loud, you can appreciate how crucial it is to understand that difference. When we're just releasing and relaxing it, it goes to a comfortable state. When we're pushing or bearing down into that pelvic floor, then potentially we're causing issues that can impact on things like urinary leakage or that feeling of heaviness or dragging in your pelvis. Now, there are some beautiful release positions for the pelvic floor, relaxation positions that you can ease your body into and just take slow, steady breaths, and they allow the muscles of the pelvic floor to release. So if this isn't the primary focus of what your pelvic floor needs, why is it still important to be able to easily and fully relax your pelvic floor? Well, if we're not fully relaxing the pelvic floor, then we're not going to get the best contraction in strengthening our pelvic floor either. It would be a little bit like doing half a bicep curl all the time, or half a leg curl all the time, or only going halfway up a stair all the time. So if we're able to fully release and relax the pelvic floor, then we can then do a full contraction of that pelvic floor, rather than just working half of the range of that muscle. Now that's kind of a simplification, but it gives you a clear image of the importance of being able to relax. It's a bit like a lift only being able to ever get to the mezzanine level and never make the first floor. So it's important we can work the full range that is available to those pelvic floor muscles, and also to give them some downtime. You know, if you think about any form of exercise that you do, you probably have a bit of a stretch off at the end of it. Why would your pelvic floor muscles be any different? So again, it's really important to include that. Now, with pelvic floor toners, often the emphasis is purely on the tighten, the squeeze, the lift. And so that release and relax kind of gets a little bit bypassed. So it's really important to understand the key part that plays in the overall support of your pelvic floor. Now, the fourth thing I was going to mention is triggers. So pelvic floor toners can give a lovely tactile way to help you feel what is going on with your pelvic floor. They give you something to hold onto with a vagina. They give you something to let go of. And I've talked through the importance of both of those things, the tightening, but also the letting go. And sometimes that's a lot easier if there's something tactile inside the vagina to help us to feel what's going on. But be realistic with yourself. If you buy yourself a pelvic floor toner, how often are you actually going to use it? How consistent are you going to be over time? And when you're actually using your pelvic floor toner, how long will you use it for in one stretch? So if you're being honest with yourself, I think you'll recognize that you'll probably use it quite actively, certainly when you first get it, but your adherence, your continuation of that will probably drop off over time. And also the fact that it's not like a workout in the gym. You're not going to be there using it for an hour at a time. So how we support our pelvic floor outside of the time that we use any kind of toning support is really important. So this could be a way that you identify times throughout your whole day where you can give a little bit of attention to your pelvic floor, just with those normal, I say normal, but the kind of non-stimulated pelvic floor exercises. For some of my clients, it's when they put the kettle on. For some, it's when they put the radio on, or if they're watching the TV, when the adverts come on the TV. Choose a trigger that's relevant to your particular day on the things that happen through your day. If you're at work, maybe it's when you send something to the printer. You can be as creative as you like, but make it obvious. And maybe to start with, put a post-it on whatever is going to be your trigger to remind you to do your pelvic floor exercises. And this is a way to support your pelvic floor throughout the day, but over the long term. It sort of then becomes a habit, a bit like brushing your teeth. How many days would you go without brushing your teeth? I'd be surprised if you said more than one. But the thing is, when it comes to things like our pelvic floor, we tend to put a lot of focus and attention into it when something goes wrong, when we're getting that feeling of heaviness or dragging, when we've had that oops moment, when we've sneezed, coughed, or laughed, something like that. And we're sort of really on it because we've really got to sort this because that was awful and it made you feel embarrassed, made you feel self-conscious, it's affected your confidence a little bit. So you really give it some focus. But then other things start to happen. Maybe it does feel a little bit better and your attention on it wanes and goes away. But the thing is, our pelvic floor is just like all the muscles in our body. It needs that constant support and attention. And I do liken it to brushing your teeth. So if you wouldn't go a day without brushing your teeth, why would you go a day without giving your pelvic floor some attention? Whether that is tightening, strengthening exercises or release and relaxing exercises or a combination of the two, find a way to include them within your everyday. Now, if you don't want to buy a pelvic floor toner, but you do like the idea of having something to hold on to and let go of, then there are other things you can use. Obviously, with clean hands, you can use 1 or 2 fingers or a thumb. Maybe you could do this with your partner and involve them in the process. And although that may sound a little bit it can actually be a way to help you to talk about what's going on for you with your partner to gain their support, and you can actually have fun with it then as well. If you do use any sex toys, then again, they give you something to hold on to and to let go of. And just that touch can help you to get that feedback as to how your pelvic floor is feeling that you can then talk about with your female health physio. My final point is that although so far I've talked pretty much exclusively about the pelvic floor and pelvic floor activation and release, it's not just about your pelvic floor. The fact is, your pelvic floor is working all the time you are. You lift your head off your pillow, your pelvic floor activates. You get out of bed. Going from laying down to sitting up provokes a huge activation within your pelvic floor. So think of the number of times you go from sitting to standing in your day. All of these things include movement. If you have experienced any issues with your pelvic floor, you'll know that those things haven't happened while you've been still. They've happened when you've been moving, even if that's just a sneeze or a cough. When you're laughing, maybe when you jump, it happens when you're moving. Therefore, it is crucial that we train your pelvic floor in the context of movement within your whole body. And that is what I do within my courses of Core Confidence and Holistic Core Restore. It's about coaching you through movements that are going to support your overall health and fitness, your strength and balance too, but with your pelvic floor at the heart of those movements, so that no matter what type of movement you're doing, maybe it's just that you can laugh without worrying about leaking, you can cough with confidence and there's no more sneeze pee either. Maybe it will help you to deal with that heaviness or dragging in your pelvis, and also recognize the fact that in over 95% of cases of lower back pain in a recent study, in a recent study looking at low back pain, over 95% of the participants had some form of pelvic floor dysfunction. Now, that's not saying pelvic floor dysfunction causes back pain, nor is it saying back pain causes pelvic floor dysfunction, but it's interesting that the two happen together, both as components of your core. So working your pelvic floor in conjunction with movement and alignment and your breath is the best way to support your whole body, everything you're feeling within your pelvis and above, to feel strong and confident and proactively deal with any concerns about your pelvic floor. And maybe there are no concerns at the moment, but you're planning a pregnancy, you're currently pregnant, you've recently had a baby, or you can feel there are changes happening within your body because of your age related to that transition towards menopause. And it's round about the early to mid 40s that I see a lot of women who are starting to feel this. Taking proactive steps to support your pelvic floor, your core, and all your movement around that helps you to feel strong and confident in your own body. And that in itself is priceless. So just summing up, do you need a pelvic floor toner? Probably not. As you've seen from me blethering on in this, that there are a number of steps that you can take that don't require that investment in a pelvic floor toner. That even if it's useful to hold on to something and let go of something, there are other things that travel with you everywhere, namely being your fingers. Just do make sure that they are clean before you insert them into the vagina. But your best investments will be in seeing a female health physio and or a holistic core restore coach, so we can support your pelvic floor through movement for whatever stage of womanhood you're currently at. And if you've got any questions with any of the points that I've discussed, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. If I can, I will help you. And if I can't, I will do my best to forward you on to whoever can provide the best support.